One of the biggest mysteries concerning the murders of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe revolves around what time these murders actually occurred. In this video we're going to take a look at some recently released information into the public domain surrounding the time of death.
Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Now, the best place to start with this video is with the official version of events as put forth by the prosecution in court. The jury were told that Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe died shortly before 7 p.m. on the evening of December the 6th. The pathologist Dr. Paula Lanas, who attended the crime scene, admitted to not trying to ascertain a time of death. And really, this is where the issues begin in the case of the Essex Boys. However, recently a CCRC appeal document surfaced online which does tell a very different story. Let's take a look at that following document, after which I'll share my own thoughts and feelings. Issue 3. The allegation that the prosecution manipulated evidence in relation to time of death. Section 67. The applicants have highlighted that Home Office pathologist Dr. Lanas did not provide an estimate of time of death when she gave evidence at trial. In her evidence, she stated that the police did not ask her to estimate a time of death. But the applicants point out that Police Action A3680 suggests that she was asked to give an estimate by the Deputy SIO, Detective Inspector George Florence. The applicants add that, since the time of their trial, Dr. Lanas has faced disciplinary action in connection with other cases. It is submitted that Dr. Lanas was incompetent. The Commission notes that a similar submission was made in the course of Mr. Steele's first application to the Commission, application received on the 2nd of February 1999. At paragraphs 107 and 108 of the Commission's Statement of Reasons for that review, dated the 15th of December 2004, the Commission reached the following conclusion on the issue. Quote, "It is Mr. Steele's contention that Dr. Lanas did determine a time of death, but that, as this was a time for which Mr. Steele had an indisputable alibi, Dr. Lanas had withheld this time of death from the court. He has pointed to cases that postdate his trial, with which the quality of Dr. Lanas's evidence and her competence have been called into question." The Commission notes that Dr. Lanas's evidence was that it was not possible to determine the time of death through pathology with any degree of accuracy. There is no evidence to support Mr. Steele's contention that she deliberately withheld a time of death because it did not fit the prosecution theory regarding the murders. In the course of the current Commission review, the applicants have submitted no additional evidence or argument on the subject of Dr. Lanas. There remains no evidence that Dr. Lanas ever carried out any assessment of the likely time of the deaths in this case. Nor is there any evidence that a time of death estimate was deliberately withheld as part of prosecution manipulation of evidence in relation to time of death. The absence of a time of death estimate has been well known since before the applicant's trial and thus does not constitute new evidence or argument for the Commission's purposes. In any event, the absence of a time of death estimate does not, in the Commission's view, give rise to a real possibility that the Court of Appeal would overturn the applicant's convictions. Mr. Wombs and Mr. Steele's representative, Mr. Bowen, has pointed out that the parameters for time of death varied in the public announcements which Essex Police made in December 1995. A police road sign appeal dated around the 14th of December 1995 stated, quote, Murder Here PM Wednesday. While LWT's Crime Monthly programme on the 22nd of December 1995 stated that the victims were killed between 1900 and 2100 hours. During his police interview on the 17th of May 1996, Mr. Steele was informed that the time of death was around 1900 hours. The Commission has considered this submission and observes that it is entirely understandable that the police's view of the timing of the murders would have been refined over time as the incident room continued to collate information from numerous different sources. Nothing in Mr. Bowen's submissions on this issue constitutes evidence that the police manipulated any evidence in relation to time of death. So here we have the mention of that person again, that name, D.I. Florence. Many of you remember the video I did a little while ago, which is titled Intimidation, which discusses the relationship between Donna Jaggers and D.I. Florence, which took place after these murders had occurred. For those of you who may not be aware, before these murders, Donna Jaggers was the long-term girlfriend of Craig Rolfe, the driver of the Range Rover. Now, in that video, it discussed the last time that Donna Jaggers saw Craig Rolfe alive. In her official statement, in the statement which was read out in court, the last time that she saw Craig Rolfe was at 5:45 when she was dropped off at Lakeside Shopping Centre. But on the 8th of December, just one day after the discovery of the bodies, it is claimed that in D.I. Florence's report and his notebook, it's mentioned that Donna Jaggers stated that the last time that she saw Craig Rolfe was actually on the morning of December the 6th, not the afternoon. And here we are again with that name, D.I. Florence, talking about the time of death. It's mentioned there that the police action A3680 claims that D.I. Florence did ask the pathologist, Dr. Paula Lanas, to ascertain a time of death. Now, I've talked about this at some length in previous videos, the lack of the time of death, the lack of attempting to ascertain a time of death, and exactly what that could achieve in terms of the investigation. Now, I have struggled to explain my thought process regarding this in the past, as it is almost counterintuitive in a lot of ways. But if they didn't have a time of death, it almost allowed for a larger scope in terms of the investigation. Let's say, for instance, that they said that these individuals were killed at 7 p.m. Really, the whole investigation is focused around that time period. And just say, for instance, that someone who you believed was responsible for that crime had a rock-solid alibi for 7 p.m, it becomes very difficult. It's almost like putting hurdles in the way, almost, of securing a conviction. But by not having a time of death, who's to say that they weren't killed at midnight? Who's to say that they weren't killed at 6:30 in the morning? Who's to say they weren't killed at 7 p.m. as told by the prosecution? It allows for a much larger scope in terms of potential suspects. That could also tie in with the fact that we have items which were recovered from the back of the Range Rover, which were also not tested for DNA. We had the Topic wrapper, the sweet wrapper, we had the ring pull, we had the crisp packet. Those individual items found in the back of the Range Rover were not tested for DNA. Again, you could subscribe to the idea that the reason for this is they didn't actually want that DNA to point in any particular direction. By not DNA testing those items, it again allows for a larger scope in terms of potential suspects. If they did DNA test those items and they come back to, say, Michael Bowman or someone who wasn't a particular person of interest at the time, then it almost takes away a little bit of credibility from the prosecution's case. Equally, Michael Steele could sit in the dock or his defence team and say, well, clearly this is this individual who's responsible for the crime. His DNA is over all of these items. Why was he not a major suspect? But by not testing these items, by not having a time of death, it allows for a larger pool of potential suspects. Now the story takes even more of a strange twist. We now hear again from this appealed document and the question of who discovered the bodies of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Mr. Bowen also pointed out that Detective Superintendent David Bright, in his statement for the Commission's Section 19 investigation, dated the 20th of May 2004, described being informed of the discovery of the victims' bodies at 6:30 a.m. on the 7th of December 1995, some 90 minutes before the bodies were discovered by Messrs. Jiggins and Theobald. Mr. Bowen submits that this indicates that the police were aware of the deaths before the discovery of the bodies by Mr. Jiggins and Mr. Theobald, and this shows that, contrary to what the defence have been informed, the victims were under surveillance on the day of the murders. The Commission has contacted former Detective Superintendent Bright and asked him to comment on the reference to 6:30 a.m, which appears in his 2004 statement. He responded to the Commission on the 21st of January 2008, explaining that his comment that the call was at 6:30 a.m. was an approximation. He could not recall who telephoned him, nor could he offer any further explanation for the time discrepancy. In the course of its review of this case, the Commission has discovered no evidence that any police officer was aware of the murders before the discovery of the bodies by Mr. Jiggins and Mr. Theobald, nor has the Commission discovered any evidence that the victims were under surveillance on the 6th of December. Essex police have confirmed that surveillance of the victims did not take place on the 6th of December. The Commission also notes Mr. Bowen's observation that the surveillance logs for the operation in question make no reference to any surveillance on the 6th of December 1995. The Commission has found no evidence that the police or the prosecution manipulated any evidence in relation to time of death. Consequently, this submission by the applicants does not give rise to a real possibility that their convictions will be overturned by the Court of Appeal. Now, with all of the above considered, is it really any wonder how we sit here many years later still talking about this case, the inconsistencies, the cut corners by the Essex police? So many unanswered questions, so many strange comings and goings concerning the case of the Essex boys. We have talk there of potential surveillance of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. It's also worth remembering that we had the pizza shop incident just shortly before their deaths concerning Pat Tate. By all accounts, Tate assaulted the manager of that pizza shop. The police attended the pizza shop. They managed to trace the call back to Tate's home address, but nothing was ever done. They didn't follow this inquiry up. They didn't attend his property. He wasn't taken in for some kind of questioning. On top of this, we then had Craig Rolfe being spoken to by the police on the afternoon of December the 6th, the day of the murders. He was stopped by the police, and bearing in mind that Craig Rolfe during this time was a disqualified driver or didn't have a valid licence, one or the other, yet nothing again was done. He was simply sent on his way. Does that tie in with the fact that they were indeed under surveillance, even up to their very deaths? Do let me know your own thoughts and theories in the comment section below. As always, many thanks for joining me for today's video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next video. Take care. Cheers.